Welcome everyone to Unsheathed Sword Reviews. I'm Vic.
And I'm John.
And today we're here to review the Honshu Historic Forge 15th Century Italian Longsword, made by OTC.
Indeed. So this is a very interesting sword because lots of people have taken a crack at it. This is Balaur Arms, who is Cult of Athena's house brand, essentially first run at this sword. As some of you may know, probably, Cult of Athena has a house brand called Balaur Arms, but they don't actually forge anything. They just sort of hire out to other forges to make their stuff. So they've done some work with Windlass. They've done some work with Honshu Historic Forge. They're now working with LK Chen. And so many of the swords that they make have several versions. This is one of those swords that has several versions that's been made by several forges under the Balaur Arms name. So this is the same sword that was made under the Balaur Arms name, except now being marketed as the Honshu Historic Forge / OTC 15th Century Italian Longsword.
Correct. And so you can find this sword on a couple different websites here in the US, and I think you can find it like overseas as well. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting. This sword, before we actually start talking about what's in front of us, kind of got to dive into a little bit of history here. So
it's relevant.
OTC, the forge that was originally contracted with Cult of Athena, had a falling out with Cult of Athena over the steel quality was being misrepresented. It was 1560 as opposed to 5160 as they were advertising. And there are some other issues that Cult of Athena didn't say. I can speculate, but I'm not gonna. But anyway, so they left, and since then you've been able to find, they essentially took the designs and the models that Cult of Athena had and just recreated them. They created a new company, I guess, named Eric Steelcrafts, where they have all of the original Balaur Arms models and some newer ones that look very suspiciously similar to some other high-end swords. Cold Steel popped out with a couple swords that were originally going to be Balaur Arms swords for Cult of Athena, and now you can buy the Honshu historic version. So the new company, Eric Steelcrafts, is still the original forge, OTC, and they have a really, really not positive reputation online. Like if you go to, if you go to the SPG forum, if you go to Facebook, there's lots of mention on him essentially doing shady business practices that we're not going to get into. And the reason we decided to review this sword is because it is a product that's available. Regardless of what you think about the shady business practices, regardless of what you think about this company, it's a product that's available. And at $279 it is a very affordable option. And I think you get a lot for the money. So I think it's worth talking about because regardless, people are probably going to buy these swords.
Agreed. So yeah, and you of course get to decide how you want to spend your money, and if you're the sort of person that doesn't want to endorse a company by spending money on it, even if it's a good deal, I would understand that for sure. But it is, again, like Vic said, it's a sword that's out there, and we wanted to review it so people would know what they're getting. And
not just this specific model, but there's lots of swords that they make in the Historic Forge line that look really good. You know what I mean? There's the Gladius looks really good. There's some army swords that look really good. And so they're enticing for people that don't want to spend $1,000 on a sword. So
exactly.
So all that said, though, how did they do? $279 budget, like hard budget for a medieval sword. Mm-hmm. What do you think fit and finish?
For a hard budget sword, I think they did really, really well. There are definitely complaints that I have about the fit and finish on this sword. I think that the one complaint I have in particular that I think they should have caught even at this price point is on the peen block. There's a fairly serious sort of chunk out of it that you can get your thumb in, and it strikes me that was a very serious quality control miss that they probably should have caught and probably should have fixed. But then again, can you catch everything like that at a $279 price point on this sword? I'm hunching probably not. So, with a few exceptions like that, in general, I have very few complaints about the fit and finish for this price point. I think it's excellent. What do you think, Vic?
Yeah, so I agree. The chip that's in the peen block, that's substantial enough to me that if this were, say, a Cult of Athena sword, I would expect it to be like a munitions grade or a blemish grade, something. I wouldn't expect it at full price for that.
See, blemished, I would say definitely because it's still functional. It's not going to impact the use of the sword. It's not like a warped blade or something.
Correct,
which I feel like it would be munitions grade. But yeah, no, I agree with you. Yeah. It should be sold at a discount. It should not be sold at the price of the sword.
Right. However, the rest of the sword actually looks pretty good, especially considering the price points. I think the grip is fairly well done. The seam is pretty tight and straight. You really can't feel it that much. The central riser looks really good. The crossguard and like the shapes of the fittings. So this specific sword, the Italian longsword that this is based off of, is loosely based off the Brescia Spadona. It's a really, really famous sword in the museum in Brescia, Italy. other makers make that sword. Albion makes one. Lockwood makes one. Very, very high end stuff. So like the look of that sword is pretty iconic. And a lot of people in the community like it. So again, why this is an enticing option, because you kind of get the aesthetic of that hilt in an affordable package.
Right, exactly.
And in terms of that, I think it looks really good. I think the guard and the pommel are maybe a little bit too big. Like they don't have as much dimension and stuff as I would like, but I would want that on a more expensive sword.
Right.
For this price point, I think it looks really, really good.
Agreed. And one thing I neglected to mention that I wanted to mention, which is probably my favorite part about this sword, is the way that the blade looks. Because it is a diamond cross section, but it's got a hollow grind on it that is just will knock your socks off. Right. Like it catches the light. We'll show you some video of moving it in the light. It catches the light beautifully. It makes this deep sort of sinister whoosh when you when you swing it. It is a good looking blade. This is a good looking blade if this was a $700 sword. Yeah. It's a great looking blade at $279. It really blows my mind.
So I'll agree with you that the hologram and the look of the blade, that's really good, and I would be fine with that if it were a $700 sword. I wouldn't be fine with the super crazy secondary bevel.
Agreed. Absolutely. I was just the hologram.
Okay,
I was talking about just the hologram. Yeah.
But even with that, like even if this were a more expensive sword, I probably would be fine with it. Like it's not that bad. Like the gap in the cross guard, it's big and it's not the most symmetrical, but again, whatever. Like sub $300, I am not going to harp on that too much. But to get a hollow grind and like a really good looking hollow grind for under $300, like that's what really makes the sword stand out. You know what I mean?
Agreed. And it was a weird juxtaposition for me that they have a sword with a hollow grind that's this good and that peen block that's that bad. It was just like one of these things is not like the other. You know what I mean? It was kind of weird.
Well, and that's part of that also plays into OTC's reputation. A huge part of that reputation was quality control. This should have been cut, I think, personally. Yeah. And it wasn't, or it was overlooked is my suspicion.
My hunch is they're like, good enough.
Yeah, literally.
Yeah, mediocrities,
But again, you're paying less than $300 so what can you expect for that fit and finish? And like I have seen personally, so the quality control is one thing, but like the grip quality and all that is way better than I would expect for this price point.
I completely agree. It feels really good in the hand. It's very well balanced. It's very quick. This is the sort of longsword that you hand to people if they've never held a longsword before and they fall victim to the myth of, katana car in half, longsword club, that whole thing. Yeah. You hand them this and they're like, what? Okay, what? That's interesting. So yeah, no, it's a good representation of what a longsword can feel like, I think.
Agreed. And worth mentioning real quick that this sword was bought at BDK, and you could also find it on True Swords if you live in the US. Both those sites have the weight listed at 2.65 pounds. This one came in, we weighed it on our scale at 3 pounds, 2 ounces. So at least a half pound heavier than what they're advertising. I don't know if they just made a revision and haven't updated the sites, or if there's wild inconsistencies between the quality control. Not sure. On that note though, handling. You said you could put this in the hand of somebody who thinks that medieval swords, European swords, are heavy crowbars.
Yes.
This is not the case with this, right?
It is not the case with this at all. So it's got a point of balance at about 2.9 inches out. We did not list the distal taper on this, but we will link that in the description. But it's got a fairly substantial distal taper, so it is very, very wieldable, very maneuverable. It feels really excellent in the hand. I like it. I really, really like it a lot. Another person that we are friends with that we've done some reviews with in the past, Kane Shen, did a review where he talked about the blade harmonics and where the vibration nodes are and pointed out quite accurately that they're not perfect in this and that the vibration node is closer into the handle than it should be, which again, for $279, that's gonna, you're gonna have to make sacrifices like that. This is not designed by Angus Trim, right? But I have no complaints about the handling whatsoever. It is a very serviceable, very fun backyard cutter. And honestly, it's one of those kind of swords that does some of the work for you. It actually makes you feel a little bit better than you are. And I think in general, 18Bs tend to feel that way to me. And I think this is a good representation of an 18B in that way. What do you think, Vic?
I agree with pretty much everything you said. Yeah, the center of percussion being lower than it should be is something you kind of only will notice if you've handled swords that have correct center of percussions. So going back to our whole putting this in the hand of someone who's never swung a sword before, they're not going to notice that. They're just going to think it's an agile, lively sword that can move and has authority to it. The blade maintains a really, really good width up at the foible, which really helps you in cutting. Like this is the kind of sword that you could really just throw forward and it will do the work for you. Like it's actually a really good cutter, and like for the budget price, for a budget backyard cutter, like, holy crap, this is fun. It's easy to wield in one hand, two hand. You could do all kinds of different cuts with it. It's sharp as hell. Again, ugly secondary bevel. Not ahistoric, though, in some cases, but sharp, like really sharp. Sharp out the box to do whatever you want with it.
100% agree. And again, I find myself almost being too harsh with this sword because it's so good that I start comparing it to mid-range swords.
Right.
And then I realize, wait a minute, but no, it only costs $279.
Right.
So I think that's, it almost tricks me into being harsher on it than I ought to be. So, but no, it handles beautifully.
Another quick thing, and this is going back to the aesthetics of the sword, is the central ridge really kind of wavers to the right at the tip and is nowhere near centered. Again, that's an aesthetic thing. I don't think that affects the sword very much.
I don't think so either, no.
And you expect some, even in high-end swords, there's not perfect symmetry and perfect crispness in lines, but this is really like off to the right.
This is, if it was an Albion, you would send it back.
Yes.
For sure. But
however, it is not an Albion.
It is not an Albion, nor is it claimed to be, nor is it priced as such. So, yeah.
So on that note, $279 US.
I can't recommend this sword enough, which it concerns me somewhat because of the sort of gray area that it's in as regards intellectual property. I'm not well versed enough on it to know for sure, but I know there's a little bit of a smell test issue here, so that concerns me. But I think, if you are looking to get into collecting swords and you have a choice between this and a $200 katana, there's just absolutely no decision in my mind. You should get this. Like, this is a really, really, really good sword. It feels like it's firmly in the middle of the mid-range. It's a great value. Even with the quality control issues that it has, even with, some of the issues in terms of fit and finish, I'd say go for it. I think it's worth rolling the dice.
Yeah, I agree. If you are in the budget range and you want a nice longsword that looks good, that has striking features to it, and that handles really well and is fun, I'd be hard pressed to find a better sub $300 option.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, comparing it to $200 katanas, that's a fair comparison. But if you're the kind of person that doesn't want a katana, you want a longsword, it's harder to get something at good quality.
That's a solid point.
Lower in the price range.
Right.
This, however, is really, really fun and will do the work for you in a way that, like, more expensive swords sometimes don't, even in the same typology. So, issues aside, I think it's worth checking out.
And when I was making that comparison to a $200 katana, my point was that if you're just looking for a functional backyard cutter of any type that you can go hang out with your friends, drink some beers, and cut things in half with, I think this is at the top of the pile for anything anywhere near its price range.
That makes more sense.
Yeah, that's kind of what I meant to say.
Okay.
So, but in general, I can't recommend it enough. I think it's a very, very good price at this price point. And if you just turn off all of the worrying about anything that might be nefarious about their business practices, it's a great deal.
Oh, also should be mentioned, comes with a scabbard too. At $279, I'd have been happy with that, but this is actually not a bad scabbard.
It really is not a bad scabbard at all. I think it's much nicer than you would expect it to have, It's got a stainless steel chafe at the bottom, or at least chromed anyway. I don't know if it's stainless or what it is, but it doesn't rust and it won't take bluing. I can tell you that much.
Sounds like he's tried.
So in general, it's a nice scabbard. It's got rain flaps. It's really nice. It's again nicer than it needs to be for this price point.
Agreed. At $279, I'll be fine with just the sword. But
absolutely,
or a cheap leather flimsy sheath, and
exactly.
You get a good scabbard. So I think it's worth it. I can't recommend it enough. Go check it out. The link's in the description.
Yeah, so we want to say thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, if you would like and subscribe, we would very much appreciate that. Also, if you stay tuned to the channel, there are some videos coming up that might interest you, especially if you found this one interesting. There's going to be a comparison between this and a very similar sword, and some discussions about the pros and cons, as well as some reviews of some interesting and popular arming swords that are hot in the market right now. So please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss any of that, and thank you very much for watching. Peace.